Howard Beck's media talents are like Steph Curry at the free throw line. They're spot on and they're clutch. He is a journalistic juggernaut in NBA media circles. You can find him on Sports Illustrated, Sirius XM. The list goes on. He also has a podcast, the Crossover Podcast, which I encourage everybody to listen to. We just had Monty McCutcheon on, a longtime NBA referee, for a discussion. So this is going to be a discussion with Howard about insights and stories from his decorated career. I'm Bryan Fenley, an anchor at Fox Sports Radio, and that's another platform where you oftentimes will hear Howard. Howard, first of all, thank you so much for doing this. I know you are super busy, have a stacked schedule, and really appreciate your time. I wanted to start here. I brought up the comparison of Steph Curry, but when it comes to an NBA style out there, a guy, a player, and how he conducts himself on the court and the flair he has, what kind of flair would you see in yourself that's parallel to a certain player when it comes to your writing, when it comes to how you do media?
Wow. There's an analogy I've never contemplated in my many, many years of writing. I'm supposed to be good at analogies. This is, you put me on the spot. Thank you for the very kind introduction and the very flattering comparison. I'm nowhere near to journalism what Steph Curry is to basketball, but that's all right. And this is video, so you can actually see me blushing. Yeah, I mean, I don't. If I start thinking about writers, there are writers with a lot of flash or, pizzazz to their writing. And so maybe those guys would be, the Kobe Bryants or the Allen Iversons or the Kevin Durant's, like the eye popping. I don't think that would be me. I tend to think, so I spent 16 years, we'll get into some of this, I'm sure, but, I spent 16 years covering teams as a beat writer, 7 years on the Lakers and 9 primarily on the Knicks, with a quick detour to the Nets for a little bit. And so I was a grinder. So especially for that 16-year period, I think my comparison point, my NBA analogy would be more of like, I don't know, a skinnier Marcus Smart, much skinnier. I was more like just, I don't know. I see myself more as like grinder role player type than leading man or star of team. And then within a newspaper sports section, at the LA Daily News and the New York Times, like that really is the fact. Like that's those beats were important. The Lakers and Knicks beats were important, really important. But you're a cog in a wheel, especially at the Times, which is 1,200 journalists and covering the entire world and covering much weightier things than NBA basketball. So that's how I always kind of view myself, was more just kind of, worker bee type, I guess. And then, the last 7.5, almost 8 years, I've been in the national writer role, first at Bleacher Report, now at Sports Illustrated. And I did some national stuff at the Times too, but, in that role, yeah, I think there's a little bit more maybe prominence, and there's a little bit more, I'm less of a grinder worker type, in that I don't have to crank out 250, 300 stories a year just to keep up with the team. There's a lot more latitude to just kind of pick and choose the kinds of stories I want to do. And that allows me to do, deeper storytelling and more, and I think more interesting stuff than just going game to game to game and practice to practice. So I don't know if that answered your question, Bryan, but there's my attempt.
It did answer my question, because I was looking for a name. Marcus Smart is there. I was thinking, you brought up the whole grinder aspect of how hard you are at working and pushing through with deadlines. I was thinking like a Tony Allen on the Memphis Grizzlies, like that grit and grind. Yeah. Why not?
Also, I can't shoot, so that's perfect.
There you go.
Marcus Smart might be too good of a shooter to possibly be the right analogy for me. I don't know why we ended up with two seriously, like edgy defensive types who cut their teeth with the Celtics.
And both went to Oklahoma State.
Oh, that's funny too.
Yeah,
I should. I mean, my roots are in California, San Jose, where I grew up. So I should be looking for more of like a Bay Area, comp or something. I'm just not sure who that is right off the top of my head. As long as it's not Joe Barry Carroll, we're okay.
There you go. As far as your finest work, in your field over the course of your career, what's that one piece that you would gravitate to?
It's hard because one, I don't know that there's one signature piece, in my whatever thousands of stories that I've written. And it's the kind of thing where, like, there's a couple of things that pop into my head immediately because of the response they got. So I guess that's where I should go, right? So the one that has been, brought up to me the most in the last 5 years or so, I think it's 5 years since I wrote it, was the Carmelo LeBron James story that was about their friendship, their rivalry / friendship, and just the evolution of that, of their own games, their careers, all the intersections, and how they have, navigated all that over the course of, it's now been almost 18 years in the league. It's incredible. Those guys are both still going. And LeBron, of course, playing at the level he was before the recent injury, and that Carmelo is still a really productive player in Portland right now. But that story, it was one, it's, I love the stories that are hiding in plain sight. And that one had always just, because, so LeBron and Carmelo come into the league together in 2003, right? Same draft class. LeBron's number one, obviously. Carmelo taking a couple spots later. And at the time that they were drafted, it's always stuck in my head. I'm covering the Lakers at the time, still in 2003. And at that time, I remember how there was big debate about who was going to be the better pro. Yes, LeBron was going to be number one. That everybody understood, that everybody agreed. But Carmelo was coming off leading Syracuse to a national championship as a freshman. He's a spectacular scorer. He's dynamic. He's charismatic. He's got an NBA body. He's just got NBA stardom written all over him. And LeBron, for all of his immense talents and also NBA ready body, he's a high school kid. And we've had so many misfires on high school kids by that point too. So maybe that was part of it, but there was like this legitimate debate about not who was going to be number one, but who would be the better pro. And stuff was written and things were said, and scouts weighed in and writers weighed in. And some people actually said, you know what, LeBron is phenomenal, but yeah, he's more playmaker, he's a passer, whatever. Carmelo, man, this guy, he's a big time scorer. He's going to be and so like that always stuck in the back of my head. And then when Carmelo ends up being traded to the Knicks, who I was covering at the time, it always struck me that, man, these guys came in together, but at this stage, now LeBron he's already been to the finals with the Cavs. He's now gone to Miami the previous summer before Carmelo gets traded to the Knicks. And over the next couple of years, as I watch this evolve, LeBron goes and wins a couple titles. He goes to four straight finals and wins 2 championships. He's got a bunch of MVPs by that point. Carmelo is still struggling with, what the best version of Carmelo is. And he voluntarily he forced his way out of Denver, where they'd been to a conference finals, to go to a Knicks team that had to send out all of their best assets to get him. And now he's kind of stuck. And so it always struck me, like, what's it like to be like, basically, this is one of your best friends in life, not just in basketball. But I likened it in the story to, like the Marsha moment in the Brady Bunch, because, LeBron is Jan and Carmelo is or LeBron is Marsha and Carmelo is Jan, and like which is no insult, by the way. I'm a middle child myself, so I know how this goes. Anyway, the seeds of it were in the draft, and always remembering how those two came in as almost equals, and even with Carmelo having the edge in some people's view, and then the disparate fates that they had in the NBA, and knowing that they were really close friends, and just being curious about it. It is the story that's hiding in plain sight. We know they're friends. We know they're rivals. We know they've always been compared. They always will be compared. And yet there's this other thing. And I just thought that was interesting. They both were phenomenal in talking about each other and their friendship over the years. It was just a lot of fun to do. And that story got such great response. There are probably other stories that I'd have to go scroll through my own stuff. Like nothing ever stands out to me off the top of my head. I don't know what like somebody who's read my stuff for the last 10 years would point to. That's the one that I feel like got the most response.
Howard Beck is with us, and obviously you're speaking of the projections that Carmelo Anthony and LeBron James had when they first came into the league. How about the projections you had in yourself when you first entered the NBA reporting space, and your ceiling in which you thought you had at that point to what it lines up to today?
I often give a couple of like weird disclaimers on my career, especially when I'm talking about the last now 24 years almost of covering the NBA, which is that nothing about my career makes any damn sense. And there was a show on when I was a kid called That's Incredible. And it was like all of these weird stunts and things that people would do. And some of them were very dangerous. And so they always gave this disclaimer on the show. This is like late 70s and early 80s. Kids, don't try this at home. And that, I feel like that's my career. Like, I don't know how I got here or what happened or why I've been able to do this as long as I have, because none of it makes sense. So kids, don't try this at home. I, covered primarily news for about a half a decade, local government, city hall, small town politics, that kind of stuff. And then in 97, I'm still doing that when one of my old bosses, I had been in sports briefly at a small town paper in Davis, where I'd gone to college in Davis, California. The sports editor there had gone on to become the sports editor at the LA Daily News, and calls me one day and says, listen, I know you've been out of sports for a little bit, and I'm living up the road from LA at this point, up in Ventura County, about an hour or so away. He says, I don't know if you're interested in coming back to sports. We have an opening on the Laker beat. Our beat writer, Mark Stein, just left for the Dallas Morning News. And so and he says, listen, if you're interested, he says, because we've known each other, he goes, I'm not going to interview you. It's not going to be up to me. I'm going to put you in a room with the deputy sports editor and the assistant sports editor and the editor in chief of the page. Like they're going to be handling this. But if you're interested, I think you'd be great. And at that point, I'd been out of sports for, like I say, about 5 years. And I didn't think I was going back to sports. And so this is why my career makes no sense. If he never makes that phone call, you and I aren't talking right now. And so shout out to Mike Anastasi. Thanks, Stas. I did debate it at the time. Shaq and Kobe had just gotten there the year before. So it's clear the Lakers are going to be a force for years to come. They've got these two transcendent players. Kobe's not Kobe yet. He's 19. He's still finding his way. Shaq is obviously already Shaq. He'd been to the finals with Orlando. But I did debate it in my own head because I thought I'd left sports behind. I wasn't sure I was going to go back again. And then a couple friends were like, are you fucking crazy? Can we curse on your pod? Bleep me if you need to.
No,
are you
no.
freaking crazy? And so
I love it.
So no, it turns out I'm not crazy. I did decide to interview for the job. They did hire me, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Where do you think you would be without that call right now?
I don't know. I had started at that time. I was doing half local government, covering small town government, going to city council meetings, that kind of stuff, which I weirdly enjoyed on some level. And then the Ventura County Star, the newspaper I was at the time, had just launched a technology section, because this is like late 90s when there was that tech boom, the .com boom. And so everybody's expanding their tech coverage. And so I'd started dabbling in that too. And there was part of me that thought, well, maybe that's what I'll do. This is the next wave of journalism that'll be really important, is covering the tech industry. And, I'm from San Jose originally. I'm from Silicon Valley, and the San Jose Mercury News was that was my newspaper growing up. That was what I read every morning, mostly the sports section, but also the rest. And so there was part of me I thought, well, and they had hugely expanded that department. They'd hired a ton of writers. And so part of me thought, well, maybe that's my ticket back to the Bay Area. Maybe I'll go write for my hometown paper that I always wanted to write for. Initially, I thought that was going to be as like the Niners beat writer, because I was a big Niners fan when I was a kid. And so you usually first you gravitate toward whatever you're a fan of, because your fandom is what drives you into sports journalism. But as I veered from sports, I got into other things, but I still thought about going back and working for the Merc. That would have been the dream job once upon a time. So if I never get that phone call about the Laker beat, I don't know. I mean, it's been 24 years, and it's, altogether possible I would have gravitated back to sports at some other juncture. Maybe I would have found that NFL beat job that I thought was my dream job back when I was a teenager and first started down this path. I always thought it would have been the NFL. Football was my first love as a fan. So could have been that. Could have been covering local government. Maybe I'd be in a Washington bureau by now, covering Congress or the White House or something. I really don't know. It is one of those weird, paths not taken.
How much of your sense of self is tied to your work?
A lot more than I'd like to admit. I think that's all of us, though. I mean, I think anybody who's in, especially, this is a creative field, right? If you put as much of yourself into your work as we do when you're writing and reporting or podcasting, I think you start to define yourself a lot more by your work than maybe you ever thought you would, right? Like, I'm married. I have a beautiful 15-year-old daughter who is wonderful, and I have a great personal life, friends, all these other ways in which we define ourselves, right? Through our families, our friends, our relationships, things that we do away from work, and but we all spend partially out of necessity, partially out of passion, an ungodly amount of hours doing what we do. And I mean, I never, as we've established, I never thought I'd be covering the NBA for 24 years and all the travel that entails and all the nights away that entails. And so there's some sacrifice along the way there too. But that has also been something that has really enriched my life. And it has enabled me also to take my wife and daughter to all kinds of places on all of my airline miles and Marriott points along the way. So it's all intertwined. But yeah, your identity becomes very wrapped up. And especially now with social media, right? Like when you're an anonymous byline, back in the newspaper era, which is what I came up in, you're just an anonymous byline. My photo is not in the paper. I'm not on TV. Occasionally, maybe I got, somebody interviewed me to hey, we're doing something about Shaq and Kobe. Can you give us 5 minutes? But you're not in people's living rooms. I'm not a personality. I'm not a presence. I'm an anonymous byline, and I kind of liked it that way. But we're in a different era now. And I've done my best to evolve as the media landscape has evolved over the course of the last couple of decades. And so, yeah, I'm a podcast host now, co-host with Chris Mannix at SI. Had my own podcast when I was at Bleacher Report for the last few years. I do much more TV than I used to. I do regular shifts at Sirius XM on NBA radio. I did just a ton of video during my time at Bleacher Report and do a fair amount now at SI. So now there are times I get recognized, which is weird because of podcasts and especially because of my friend Zach Lowe. Like, there's a following there and people who know me just as What Up Beck. And so you go from being comfortably anonymous and just, sitting there with your keyboard, tapping stuff out. Sometimes people love it. Sometimes they hate it. Whatever. You get an email now and then, to suddenly now we all live on Twitter and the feedback is constant. And you feel like, to the extent to back to your question, because this does tie in, how do we identify ourselves? Or do I identify myself by my career? It kind of has become who I am, right? There are like these thousands of people following me on Twitter who are following me because I'm Howard Beck, NBA writer / podcaster / whatever. And so, yeah, it all kind of, melts together. And plus it does, it consumes a ton of my time and my thoughts. So, and also there's also this, so my last bit on this before I stop rambling. When I was covering the Lakers and first started traveling a ton, and so every flight, and this is pre smartphone era, when you get on the plane, you might have like your Sony Discman in your headphones, or Sports Illustrated or Newsweek or something that I brought on to read, and the person in the next seat over is doing something similar. But people talked a lot more to strangers on planes back when I first started traveling a ton, because we didn't have smartphones and all the stuff that you could jam in it to take up your time and distract you during a flight. So if I didn't conk out immediately just from being exhausted, invariably you end up with these conversations, and people always ask, oh, so where are you going? Work or pleasure? So what do you do? Well, and as soon as I say I'm a sports writer, And I'd always withhold because you know how long these conversations get sometimes. Oh, what do you do? I cover the Lakers. Go immediately. It's like, tell me about Shaq. Tell me about Kobe. You know, is Rick Fox really an asshole? No, he's actually a really great guy. I know he seems that way on the court. He's a great guy. This would happen a lot. And so again, to the extent that it defines you immediately, if you're on a plane, if you're at a party, if you're whatever, when people, especially if they're sports fans, when they hear what you do, it's all they want to talk about, which is fine. Like, I'm happy to do that. There are times when it's like, I'm tired of talking about the NBA. I do this all the time, but I love the fact that people love it and are interested.
Yeah, you become the life of the party. You become the most interesting person around when you share your stories, because people love sports and they want to feel like they're in the know, and that's what you are. Where's the most unforeseen place you've been noticed?
Oh, that's a really fun question. I mean, you know, the place where it happens the most is, of course, just on like NBA concourses. Like, you know, I get up to go run to the bathroom or grab some food off the concourse or something, and like some random fan will be walking by. I'll hear like, "What up, Beck?" Like, huh? What? Actually, that's happened. All right, so I live in Brooklyn, and there are a lot of people in New York, as you may be aware, literally millions. And I do not expect, again, because I don't spend a lot of time on TV, I don't expect to be recognized. And if I get recognized in my own neighborhood, I would think it's by somebody I've already met before or somebody I know from. But this has happened more than once where I'm getting off the F train and and I would get a "What up, Beck?" or "Hey man, loved the pod the other day," or whatever. "You love the pod with Zach?" Would be like, and I'd look, and I would think it would be somebody I'd know, and I know it's just some complete stranger. And I'm like, I'm still not used to this idea that people might recognize me. You know, again, like if I spend a lot of time on TV, it'd be one thing, but I don't do a lot. But anyway, so that's happened. We were at this great like gourmet burger place, that like stupidly expensive burger. Bear Burger. So we're sitting at Bear Burger once, me, my wife and daughter, and these two, I say kids, but they were probably like, 19, 20, couple guys, and they're there eating, and they kept looking over. I'm like, the hell is going on? Like, do I have like barbecue sauce running down my chin? And when we got up to leave, they stopped me on the way out and said, "Hey, are you Howard Beck?" It's like, my daughter thought that was just amazing. I thought it was really strange, but again, flattering. So I'll take it.
What does your daughter think about your work?
I think she thinks it's cool. I needed to, couple different pieces of this. I've taken her to a couple of Nets games. We're a mile and a half from Barclays, so, and it's nothing about Nets versus Knicks. It's the easier place to go. It's closer. Plus, it's a little more chill there. And so I've taken her there a couple times and brought her down to the court pregame. So she's met Sarah Kustok, multiple times, and has, met some of the other broadcasters. I haven't introduced her to players and coaches and stuff, because I try not to breach that wall too much. I don't want to, I'm mindful of those barriers professionally. Sure. If somebody were to walk over, I'll introduce her or whatever.
Sure.
She might've met a couple referees too or something. And she's been to a couple of All-Star weekends. There was the All-Star weekend that was in New York. So I got her and my wife tickets to All-Star Saturday night. So that was a kick for her. And then there was one of the years that it was in New Orleans. I took them to New Orleans with me, and again, got them tickets All-Star Saturday. She went to the fan festival stuff, whatever they call that, jam session, something. Got to meet Eric Gordon. Like, he was probably in his, second, third year in the league at the time. Got a little signed mini basketball. So I think, she thinks it's cool because she's gotten to go to some of this stuff and meet some people. I've brought her into, when I was at Bleacher, I went, brought her to the podcast studio a few times. So she got to sit in while I was doing the podcast. So I think she thinks it's kind of fun. Like, she's not a huge sports fan. She'll watch some NBA with me occasionally. When she was smaller, it would be funny. Like, she would come in and sit on the couch with me. She's, 4, 5, 6 years old or something. Like, and she's like, "So who are we rooting for?" And I would have to explain, well, don't exactly root. And I think I sometimes feel guilty that, like, whatever potential for sports fandom she might have had, I probably just eliminated, because I'm not the dad who's sitting there yelling at the TV screen, cheering or crying or complaining or whatever else, because I'm not a fan. Like, I'm a fan of the game, and but I'm not a fan of teams, and I'm not rooting. And so as a result, she has no particular loyalties either. And maybe she wouldn't have been a sports fan in that sense anyway. But yeah, I think she thinks it's cool. I mean, one quick last story on this. People saw the photo on Twitter a few years back. We had gone on vacation in Ireland, started off in Dublin, and on our first night there, I had taken a photo that I posted on Twitter with somebody else that we knew in Dublin, who was also visiting, and Steve Kerr happened to be there with his family, saw the photo, texted me, said, "Hey, I just saw you tweeted about you're in Dublin." He goes, I'm here with my family. So we got together with Steve Kerr and his wife and their 3 adult kids and their friends, like this huge group. We all had like dinner the next night. So my daughter thought it was the biggest kick that we all went out to dinner with Steve Kerr and his family. So anytime I mentioned that I'd talk to him now as I'm doing other stuff, she'll be like, "Oh, how's he doing?" Whatever. And like, she feels like she has this this connection to him. And quick footnote there, yeah. Kerr's kids, who ranged whatever, they're in their 20s somewhere. And this is 3-4 years ago. Were so great with my daughter Talia. Like, they were so great taking care of her and talking to her and whatever, while we shot the shit about the NBA at the other end of the table. So that was a lot of fun, and just the wildest coincidence in the world that we all happened to be there, and that Steve happened to be checking Twitter, that I was tweeting in Dublin, Ireland, when I should not have been. I'm on vacation. I should not be tweeting. Steve Kerr should not have been checking Twitter, but nevertheless, that was kind of fun.
I love that story. And here's something really neat, Howard. So I'm from San Diego, and obviously Steve has spent a lot of time in San Diego, and he would not know me, but there was a tennis center he went to after he retired as far as a player. And I used to string his rackets at this tennis center, and he would go on and play tennis. Who am I? I'm just some fly on the wall, but it's really cool how he, parlays his talents in basketball to the success he's had as a coach. And obviously he's great on television as well. And so are you. What is the most fascinating comment you've gotten about your work from somebody in a position like Steve Kerr, somebody who's an executive or a player who, look, you weren't expecting this comment, and it might have been positive. It might have been positive, and it might have resonated with you for a while.
Yeah. I'm terrible with compliments, as you've already noticed. So there's nothing off the top of my head. There have been times where I've written something about the league where, maybe I'll go to like the Sloan conference, or a team is coming into town and I don't like, they've got a new GM that I don't know, or it's an assistant GM or somebody. The point being, there's sometimes I'll meet somebody for the first time. There's obviously a lot of people who work in this league. So as you try to be as well connected as you can, there's always somebody you haven't met before, and you meet somebody and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, of course I know who you are. I know your work. I really liked that whatever story." And like, I can't think of the story, but I know this has happened a couple of times where, and in particular, because there's this second layer to the NBA of like the mechanics of the NBA. And so sometimes you try to tap into something about a trend or a player movement, or whatever. And when somebody who spends all their time on this stuff as their job in the league says, "Yeah, that was a really astute column you had the other day," that's happened a few times over the years. Those always stick with me, even though I can't remember exactly who said it. I just remember having this conversation a couple of times where you think like, "Oh, cool. I actually knew what I was talking about there." That was like just kind of my gut kind of read of this. And so those are nice kind of validating moments. After the LeBron Carmelo story, LeBron, the next time he came through town, and you always want to see people after you've written something, whether it's tough or whether it's nice, regardless, you always want to see. Accountability is really important, and being present is really important. And so, I was definitely going to pass through, make sure I said hello to LeBron and say, "Hey, thanks again, by the way." And I think he was in New York just a couple weeks after that story ran. And I walked up, I said, "Hey, after the scrum broke up or whatever pregame, hey, just want to thank you again. Response to the story has been amazing. And just really appreciate that you and Carmelo were so generous with your time and everything." And LeBron says, he goes, yeah, he goes, that was really good. I read that one. He goes, I almost never read anything, but I read that one. Wow. All right, cool. That's, and you know, like players, you never know. So some of them, when they say I never read my clips or I never read anything, like, you know, some are telling the truth, some are not. At a minimum, they have people, they have friends, agents, associates, family members who read everything. So if there's something that's, especially if it's something alarming, they'll let them know. So, you know, it's never completely true that, oh, I didn't see that. But when he goes out of the way to tell you that they actually read it and enjoyed it, that's a nice thing to hear for sure.
Howard Beck is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. Some players also admit, and some don't, that they read their mentions on Twitter. How about you? Do you?
More often than I should. Yeah. You know, when I first got on Twitter, I think it was like 2009, like Twitter was still in its infancy. Right. And, I had this kind of this idealistic thought as it evolved and as more and more people got on and as it became this marketplace and this place where you would be not only just posting your work and to promote it, but you'd be, you know, interacting with all the other writers and with fans and readers and all this. And I had this idealistic notion that if somebody responded to me, if they took the time to respond to me, just as if they took the time to email, I'm going to respond. I'm going to reply and try to be thoughtful about it. And this is back when it was still only 140 characters too. It was a lot harder to
Sure.
jam a lot in there. You couldn't string, you couldn't do a thread either back then. You couldn't link your tweets. It was a lot harder to have a conversation. So for a while I replied to everything as long as they were being, you know, reasonably civil. But over time, a lot more people got on. Over time, people became a lot less civil, society-wide, not just in sports. And so I always still check the mentions in case, you know, it's, you know, first of all, somebody I know might have been replying or they might have said, hey, that love that story or love that podcast or whatever. And I want to be able to say thanks. Like, you know, when I got the job at SI or when anything of note has happened and I get all these wonderful responses in my mentions saying congrats on this or really happy for you. But I want to thank them all. And I will go through every single one and thank every last person because I appreciate that people took the time. But there are so many landmines too. So in trying to be, you know, hold up this ideal that I should respond to people and have these interactions and engage with fans of the game, unfortunately, then you have to encounter, you know, all the ugliness too. So I've been very generous with the block button and the mute button over the years, especially the last few years. And especially because over the last few years, I was tweeting a lot more political stuff than I ever had before. And that required me being very quick with the block and mute buttons.
Yes.
And I probably blocked and muted more people in the last 4 years than in the rest of my time on Twitter combined. But that's over.
Yeah, you have to pick and choose your spots with social media for sure. Who was the first person to root for you?
There's two different answers there, I guess. When I was still in college, I got a job at the Sacramento Union, now defunct, rest in peace, Sacramento Union, where I met, by the way, several people who have had great careers in this business. Mike Wise was there, who, of course, you know, he's been at the Washington Post, ESPN, the New York Times. Mike Silver, who's NFL Network now, but Sports Illustrated for many years, was there. Mike Fleiss, I don't know why they're all Mikes. Mike Fleiss, the creator of The Bachelor, of The Bachelor, Mike Fleiss. You can look him up. He was a sports writer at the Sacramento Union when I first got there.
Oh my goodness.
Small trivia note. My good buddy, Dan Brown, who writes for The Athletic now, he and I were both working for a while at Sacramento Union while we were still in college at UC Davis. And my first byline there was just like some, you know, short story about, you know, the athletic director at UC Davis, where I was still going to school, had resigned unexpectedly or something. And I'd written it for my college paper and I was doing freelance for the Sacramento Union. And they said, hey, why don't you write that up for us? And I did that. And my mom got it framed. So I don't know where that is now. I think it's in their house somewhere. But my mom framed like my first professional byline, my first byline that was not just in the college paper. So my mom was a big fan. My dad was really, really supportive, and a huge fan. I wrote about him recently. It was a piece that ran in the New York Times, actually, in November, December. He passed away a couple of years ago, but I was writing about the fact that the Warriors being in the finals every year allowed me all these free trips home, and I got to see my parents. And literally the last time I ever got to see my father was during the finals in 2019. But I wrote that in part because of that, because of, missing travel during this pandemic, the role that being a sports writer plays in your relationships. It takes you away from home, but it also keeps you connected to people in a weird way. And it did in that case. But I mentioned in that piece that my dad, he would always send me these emails. It's like weird times of night too, but he saw something that I wrote, cover, Knicks game. My dad was not even a sports fan. Like he was, like very casual sports fan. He didn't care about the Knicks. He cared that I was writing about the Knicks or a final story that I wrote. And so he would send me these quick 2-line emails, often lacking punctuation or capital letters, just saying, this was great. I hope your editors know how lucky they are, or hope your readers know how lucky they are, or that was poetry, or like that was literally a word he'd used in one of them. And so even though my dad was not a sports fan, he was not a journalist. I had chosen this profession that I don't think anybody saw coming when I was a kid, and was not where I was heading for most of my youth. But my parents were always as supportive as could possibly be. And getting those little notes from my dad, and thank you, AOL. Yes, I have an ancient AOL account. Thank you, AOL, for never allowing anything to ever be deleted, because all of these were still in my inbox. And so when he passed away a couple of years ago, I could go back and find all these notes. And then when I was collecting my thoughts, first for a Facebook post about him, and then later for this piece I wrote for the Times, I was able to kind of find all those cool little notes from him.
What a memento, a way to remember him and always be able to go back to. That's really special. Like people will, and I will do this. I'll keep, when my father passed away, like I'll keep letters just of his handwriting, it could be like a happy birthday card or whatever. But for you to have that in a digital space is really easily accessible and neat for you guys and your family. When speaking of being supportive of you, Sports Illustrated when did it turn from just a dialogue with them to them saying, hey, we want you, we're going to sign you, and we want to use you in all of these different ways?
Yeah, it's funny there too, because I think about, again, how supportive my parents were. I became a sports fan because of the Niners. Like, quick reference point, the catch, Montana to Clark. Like that's like this transformative or formative moment. Like that's what stokes my passions and gets me reading the sports section every morning. Like that year, that season, and that play, everything goes back to that. It's around that time that I start my subscription to Sports Illustrated. So, which I'm sure my parents were paying for. So again, shout out to my parents for supporting me that way. And then also the fact that the Mercury News was on the table every morning. Like that was my, aside from watching sports on TV, like SI and the sports section of the Merc were my gateway for this whole career. And so like every other kid growing up at that time, and every kid growing up for the last maybe 50 years, who's a sports fan, who decides that they think they might want to be a sports writer, SI is the pinnacle. Like, yes, I worked for the New York Times for 9 years. It was an honor. It was amazing. Still, one of the greatest moments of my adult life was the day that they said, we want to hire you. I can tell you exactly where I was, what I was doing, like everything. Like there's a whole moment. And that was a huge, huge thrill. And the New York Times is the greatest newspaper on earth, right? And again, back to my parents. My parents are from New York originally. I grew up in California, but they're from the Bronx. And my dad always loved the New York Times and had this, even though he was not a journalist, he had this just very high esteem for that paper, and would always sing the praises of it. Like, oh yeah, the Mercury News is fine, but the New York Times, now that's a paper, and so that was a really huge moment. But honestly, the dream job when I was first deciding to become a sports writer and during my college years was not the New York Times, because that's a paper that's about much more than sports. But SI was the pinnacle of sports journalism, always has been. And like Frank DeFord was like one of my first sports writing idols. That was, was like, oh my God, like talk about somebody who like, the artistry of the game. You want to start drawing the NBA analogies, like DeFord is Michael Jordan,
Yeah.
maybe he's Elgin Baylor actually, to invoke the not just the Elgin, passed away yesterday, of course, but Elgin is the predecessor to that whole line of Dr. J, Michael,
Sure.
Kobe. So Sports Illustrated was always the dream job. And I start covering the Lakers for the LA Daily News. I get the job at the New York Times. It's this huge moment. All along the way, SI is in the back of my mind, but you don't know if that opportunity is ever going to come. I wasn't sure I was a magazine writer. Again, like it's earlier in our conversation, I was a grinder. I was a beat guy, I thought I was a decent writer, but like, I ain't no Frank DeFord, I'll tell you that. But nobody is. And so I wasn't sure if that ever was going to come to pass. And, the funny thing about a career like this, maybe it's all careers. I can only speak for this field. So much is just about timing and opportunity. The phone call I get in 1997 in the spring saying, hey, you have any interest in covering the Lakers? The various events that led to me being able to get the job at the Times when I did in 2004. So it's forks in the road. It's not like, I know some people set out these goals, they map it out and they're like, by the time I'm 25, I'm gonna be doing this. By the time I'm 30, I'm doing this. And I admire the hell out of those people. I have never been one of those people. I've never written down goals. I've never mapped it out. I've just said, that looks good. I'm going to go do that for a while. And then if I get sick of it, I'm going to do something else. Or, oh, hey, this other opportunity came up. Oh, somebody called. Oh, this guy just left this other job. And I think that might be something I'm interested in. And what, like, I've just kind of, followed my gut as it's gone. And so I couldn't have predicted this either. I would have at some point thought that this ship had sailed for SI and me. But my contract with Bleacher Report ran out last fall. And after 7 years, they collapsed BR Magazine, which was what I called like the journalism department for lack of a better term. And once that was gone and it was clear, like, okay, this door has closed, and it's on to the next thing. And so I started having these conversations with Ryan Hunt and Steve Cannella, the co-editors in chief at SI. And, it was really nice to hear from them that like, hey, you know what, you're somebody who we've had our eyes on for a long time. And we've always enjoyed your work. And, like, I don't assume that. You never know who's reading your stuff and who's paying attention, who's not, and who's a fan of your stuff or not. And so that was really flattering to hear and really nice to hear, because I obviously hold SI in very, very high regard, going back, to my earliest days as a sports fan and aspiring journalist. Again, it was the dream job. So those conversations were a thrill to have on their own. And then, getting hired in to do, the modern version of this job, right? When I was reading Frank DeFord, it was just DeFord and his probably his typewriter, maybe eventually a Trash 80 Radio Shack. And then maybe an iBook or a MacBook or something later. But today, to do this job, it is everything. I'm writing, I'm podcasting, I'm doing videos, tweeting, for better or worse. And so it's the modern version of the job. And I love it. Absolutely thrilled to be there. And it is funny, there are various stages over the last 24, 25 years, whatever, that I wouldn't have thought this would ever be able to come to pass. So it is really great getting to call people and say, hey, it's Howard Beck from Sports Illustrated calling. Do you have a minute?
Given how early on in your life that was what you wanted to do, that was what you were aiming for. So it's come full circle for you. And while it hasn't been planned out the way that you maybe intended or that you had thought it would, that zigzag map has led you right to your passions and right to your start. My final question for you, Howard Beck is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. And Howard, I could go on forever with you, man. I love your conversation. This has been so much fun. How do you let yourself enjoy your achievements?
We're so often in it. You find this when you write, because like it is a grind, and it is fast paced, and hours are weird and everything else. And so we're so immersed in it all the time. You don't get to step back often, but it is like, this is analogous to pro athletes, right? Because we do this all the time, right? LeBron, you just scored your 10,000th point, your 20,000th point, or whatever. You've won your, what does this moment mean? Or, coach, you just won your 1,000th game. Like we have all these little markers and whatever. And it's the perfunctory question. And they're like, I don't know, I'll look back when it's all over. I don't, and we sit there and we're kind of like, yeah, right. Come on. You love the fact that you just, tied Michael Jordan for, most postseason victories or something. And some of those probably mean more than others to the players. But I do think there is something to be said for, they are in the moment. Their careers are finite, all of our careers are technically finite, but theirs are shorter. And I think that it is so much about the process. Kobe used that word all the time. We ask about this, that, whatever, about his own game, about where the Lakers were in the course of a season. It's just a process. It's a process. He said that all the time. And you understand it more after you've watched it for a while, but also after you've had your own career process, where it's like, again, I always go back to the line from Once in a Lifetime, Talking Heads. Like, how did I get here? Like, I don't know. It was like a billion other little twists and turns that got me to this point. Right. And so I didn't plot it out. It just, this is where I ended up. But in the midst of it all, you're not seeing, oh, this story is going to get noticed in a way that something else didn't, or this story is going to get this award, or this game that you just covered is this historic moment, and that's going to cause more people to read and be aware of who you are, or whatever. I don't even know. I just know that somewhere in the course of covering the Lakers, my profile rose because the Lakers were great, and I wrote decently enough, and that got me to the New York Times. And and then it just evolves from there. And so you don't, in the midst of it all, you're not thinking about, aha, I got it. I've just written the perfect game story. I've just written the perfect off day notebook on a Saturday in the middle of February. It's all just a process. You are just trying to keep up. Sometimes you're really just trying not to pass out, especially during the beat writer years, because it is such a grind. But somewhere along the way, if you're being, taking a minute to be reflective and diligent and constantly scrutinizing your own work, and I did, you're making improvements along the way. And, it is a cliche, but it's a true one about writing, that, you can only get better at writing just by writing, right? You just have, there's a lot of bad stories you got to get out of your system, or bad jokes, bad sentences, stupid little, whatever. There's just a lot of stuff you got to write just to get it out of your system, and then realize when you see it in the paper the next day or online the next day, oh yeah, then that wasn't funny, and that wasn't clever. That's just lame. I'm not doing that again. And you do. I think most people just have to kind of just keep doing that and keep working at it until eventually you feel like, okay, I write pretty fluidly. I write, I've gotten a lot of the crap out of my stories. And so there's no one moment. So it is just, I think, constantly trying to reflect and be my own harshest critic. And I was really fortunate in my early days covering the Lakers that I started off on the beat. The beat writer for the LA Times was Scott Howard Cooper my first year. And then Tim Kawakami followed him, and then Tim Brown followed him. So over the course of my 7 years, those were three really talented, really excellent, but very distinct writers with very different approaches to the beat, very different personalities, very different voices. And I looked at myself, at my stuff every day, and said, did I do better than they did? Or did they do better? How did they do better? And every day, that was what I was aspiring to. I wanted to write a story. I was at the LA Daily News, right? Like we were the second paper. We were like the other paper. We're the paper that a lot of people didn't even know existed. So as far as I was concerned, all right, the LA Times is like, they're the standard in this market. So if there's any given day that I could beat them either on a story or just, write better than my counterpart did. And those guys are friends too, but like to this day, they're friends. But they gave me something to shoot for and to measure myself against. And it's not to say that other writers haven't over time. Also, I don't want to exclude anybody, but that was my marker, especially in those early years, because I was new to the NBA, new to the beat, new to this whole, this part of my career. And so it was important to have that. and to give myself kind of something to aim for. And then over time, at some point you start to realize you're no longer trying to emulate somebody else, or, some technique that you saw in the way they built their story, or eventually you just realize you woke up one day and you're like, oh, I've developed my own voice now. I don't know what that is, but I think I've got my own thing now. And again, it just, as Kobe said, it's a process. You don't really focus on the end result. You focus on those little steps along the way. And then one day you wake up and you're going, oh, okay, I've done all right. I don't remember what the question was, Bryan, but I think that might have answered it.
You did. For Kobe, it was a beautiful process. For you, it has been a beautiful process. And like for Kobe, he learned the triangle offense. I feel like your writing started someplace and has morphed into the complexities of, say, the triangle offense. Howard Beck with Sports Illustrated, with Sirius XM, an awesome guy, a talent, love the storytelling. I'm Bryan Fenley. Really appreciate your time. This was really fun.
Nah, it's my pleasure, Bryan. Thanks for all the really thoughtful questions and for letting me ramble for a while. I enjoyed it.